Welcome back. This is the final step regarding the illustration. Once we are done with this part, the artwork will be ready to place in a mockup for presentation. We will start by selecting one of the groups we created in the last step and adding a new layer with a clipping mask on top of it. First off, we are going to add some gradients to the element we have chosen. Select the gradient tool from the toolbar and click on the gradient bar that should appear on top. We will modify the main color by selecting it from one of our elements and then tweaking the tone a little bit on the color selector. Once the color is selected, click and drag upwards to create a gradient over the selected element. Be sure also to set your layer to multiply. This will affect the whole element. If you want to repeat this procedure in certain parts of it, select the lasso tool and make an appropriate selection for the parts you want to work on. In this case, I'm making a selection over the character's jacket. Since I'm adding the gradient to the bottom of it, I don't have to take much into account the selection on the top. As you can see, adding gradients to different parts of each element will add more volume, keeping the artwork from looking plain. I'll repeat this step in every element in the illustration. This way, we are gaining more tones on each part of it and making it look more lively. Once we are done with the gradients, let's move on to shading. Just as we did with the base coloring, let's select the lasso tool and start making selections on a new layer, which will be set to multiply. When adding shadows, keep in mind that this is a 3D object and thus shadows should reflect this. You can take the dot work shadows as a guide. Since the layer is set to multiply, the color will vary depending on the section over which it is painted. So not all of the shadows will have the same color, but will take some of the tone from underneath. Still, if you feel like some colors should be modified, press Ctrl+U while selecting the desired color to open the hue and saturation window, where you can tweak the color settings to either make it brighter or darker, and edit the hue a bit. When working the shadows, also keep in mind the position of certain objects so you can decide how dark they should be according to their placement. Once the shading of the character is done, let's move on to lighting. Again, we will create a new layer, clip it, and select a color from our element, which we will tweak a bit to make it brighter. I'd recommend working the lighting with a color rather than using white, and modifying its opacity. This way, the light will also have some color rather than just be a brighter part of the element. Also, remember that this will be the color of your light source, which in this case comes from the left, which means that every element affected by it should have a lighting done with the same tone. I'll start by adding lighting on the edges and some of the cloth folds that are present in this area. You can create detail with lights, so take some time to decide where is a good place to render them. In my case, I'm adding them to spots where they will give the impression of more volume, like folds and small details like the stitchings on the jacket. When adding light to a different section, I'd recommend modifying the color a bit. In this case, I'll start working on the skin parts, so I'm moving the hue of the color a bit so it has more yellow in it. Once again, I'm adding lighting to spots that will give a volumetric appearance. Finally, I'm adding one extra layer to work some details on the jacket. The idea is for it to look like it has a pattern printed over it. For this, I'm creating a new layer beneath the gradient, lighting and shadow ones. This is so it also becomes affected by these layers and the pattern looks like it was printed on the jacket. I'll be using a yellowish color and set the layer's opacity to around the 30% mark, so it takes some of the magenta color beneath it. I'll start working a scale-like pattern that will cover most of the jacket. You see that since the layer's opacity is not 100% and placed under the light and shadow layers, the colors are taking small variations when being rendered. These are the steps that we will apply to every element in the composition. Be sure to take the time to analyze how the light is working and what parts should have lighting and what parts should have shadows. As I said previously, practice is the best tool to render this appropriately. Since the other element I'm working on includes a lot of water, I am making the lighting to be a bit stronger than on the character, since water reflects light in a stronger way. Finally, I'll add a simple dot texture to the yellow background. You can do this by double-clicking the base color layer. This will open the Layer Style window and allow you to add texture over it. Select the Pattern Overlay option and change the pattern option to the 5th one. Afterwards, tweak the scale a bit so the dots are not too big and set the texture to multiply, and reduce the opacity just a little bit. Now that we are done with the main illustration, we can move on to the final step. There, I will add some text to the main illustration and create the mockup. So let's go on to the final step.